As of late, I've been getting a lot of comments from viewers with regards to the subject of de-escalation, and there was one that really stood out to me and ultimately inspired this video. The person commenting said, would it be possible for you to do a video on de-escalation and the kind of de-escalation that can be done without making you look like a coward? I could not have appreciated that statement any more than I do, because that's oftentimes the issue. A lot of people don't feel like they can de-escalate. They feel like they have to go into the conflict. Otherwise, they're a coward for not doing so. And you know what? That's just not true. It's never been true. It never will be true. No one is a coward for doing everything they can to avoid a potentially life-altering situation. There are people paying big prices right now who didn't understand the things we're going to be talking about in this video. Before I get into these three very important bullet points, there's two W's I want to talk about with regards to de-escalation. The first W is we have to want de-escalation, because I'm going to tell you the truth. There's a lot of people who deep down who really don't want to de-escalate. They really want to try themselves and the other individual, and they will push and they will push until something happens. In order to de-escalate, we've got to desire to do so, because you have de-escalators and sometimes you have instigators. The truth is, we can't be both at the same time. The other W is willingness. We have to have the willingness to act if we're unable to de-escalate. But de-escalate what? What kind of situations are we even talking about de-escalating? Because it's not going to apply to every kind of attack, because assailants come in different forms. Some assailants out here are ambush assailants. These are the people who just ambush people suddenly. There's no de-escalation there. You can only act. You have your coercive assailants. You have people who will coerce others into deeper waters so that they can do what they seek to do. But in this video, I want to focus more on the public disturbance, the person that we run into out here in life, things that can happen at random, situations that can pop up at random, because there's a lot of examples we can point to. That's the main area of focus with this video. Number one, if you can detect things early enough, you may not even have to de-escalate. There are times where you may pick up in your gut that something is not right and you need to listen to your gut. And sometimes that might mean relocating, getting away from the situation. A lot of people end up having to de-escalate situations because they hang around too long. In some cases, if the situation's bad enough, you need to move away from that situation and possibly make a phone call, because it could get bad for the people who are involved sometimes minutes down the line. So in some cases, if you recognize that something is clearly off, you may decide to go ahead and notify the authorities. There's been a lot of situations where I've watched things from a distance and I'm like, yep, something's getting ready to go down over here. And you can make that call. I can't tell you the number of times I've been somewhere and I've seen something starting to heat up, starting to go down. The atmosphere didn't feel right, and I just moved on. A lot of times we stick around and we stay in a vicinity a little bit too long. A lot of times we don't use our gut and just move on. So early detection will keep us from having to go into phase 2 of this, which is a lot more complicated. Second thing I want to tell you is very important. If someone is coming your direction, if the threat is coming your way, and that is, you have to demand distance. You can't ask for it. You have to demand it, because the further back you can keep them, the better off you are. Commanding distance ultimately comes very natural to us. I'll give you an example. There have been so many videos that I have watched of people out hiking, and all of a sudden they're being encroached by a wild animal, whether it's a mountain lion or a bear, and just about every time you hear the individual yelling, "Get back." It's very natural for us to command that distance. You don't have to be crazy aggressive when you're demanding that there be some distance, but you have to be firm. Don't be afraid to command distance anytime you don't feel right in your gut. It might be someone randomly walking up to you on the street, asking you for something. Make them stay back. Listen, you don't know them and you don't owe them. And sometimes a little bit of distance is all it takes for you to be able to de-escalate with your words. Sometimes it might be just clearing up a misunderstanding. Sometimes it might just be letting them know, look, I don't want any trouble. I'm not looking for any trouble. I'm sorry if I caused you any, and I'm going to move on. The thing is that the distance allows you time. The thing that makes demanding distance so important is, number one, they're not close enough to suddenly attack you. Number two, you get to find out how determined they are in that moment. I've been in a few situations where I demanded that somebody stay back who was coming close to me, and they did. And I never had anybody try to press beyond that border. But the thing is, some people will. And when you're demanding that distance, that they stay back, you'll find out how determined they are, which is going to lead us into phase 3. If they decide to close that distance suddenly and get in your face, you can't let them get in your face. It's all too easy for them to get in your face, pow, pow, before you even know it. And I've seen it, and I've seen it more times than I care to admit. And as much as I hate to say it, sometimes de-escalation actually means having to do something, because ultimately at that point, you're de-escalating you getting hurt. If someone approaches you suddenly, get your hands in front of them, get back. Get back. You're keeping them back this way. You're not putting up your dukes yet. You're keeping them back because, number one, they're slightly out of reach. Number two, it's a whole lot easier to transition into a defense. If your hands are down and they get close to you, you're in a bad situation. Somebody's got quick hands. They can come upside your head. They can do anything. So you've got to put that barrier between them. Hey, stay back. You know, this is your final warning. Between you and that person, this is your final warning. Because if they try to go past this, you got to do something. You got to do something quick. But having your hands up allows you to transition into defensive positions. One of my favorite positions for a sudden barrage is this. The reason why is, number one, I'm protected on this side for wild hooks and haymakers. And here, I'm also protected from that, but I'm also protected from straight punches. If they come across with their strong hand and then they try to come in this way, you are well guarded in this position, and then you can act. That's if a sudden barrage comes. But you can't let people continue to swing. Once you absorb the attack, you got to act immediately. There's a lot of ways these things can go down. You might be the type of person who, the moment that they come into this barrier, you start fighting. I respect your decision there. Every situation is different. You got to use your gut. You got to know what you got to do when it's time to do it. But, you know, even from here, you can still de-escalate. But you got to be ready to absorb sudden attacks that come in. Don't try to do no fancy blocks like this. Just cover your vitals. That's a very realistic. You can quickly guard this way from a wild punch. Another thing too, having your hands up and being able to absorb allows you to push off and access weapons or get in whatever position you need to further act. But remember, you're not obligated to let them take the first swing. They already took the first swing by not refusing to stay back. Because if there are witnesses nearby, they've already witnessed everything you've tried to do to de-escalate anyway. I've got Bob stretched out here because a lot of times I like to train for somebody who's bigger and more menacing. And when they're moving forward and your hands are up, this is where you have to decide what you're going to do. Remember, with this, we're not being overly aggressive. We're just ready. We're just like, hey, whoa. You know, we're not going into toe-to-toe mode yet. We don't want to stir the pot more than we need to, but our hands are up. Now, as I mentioned, if I'm here and he decides to go for a wild swing, it's a whole lot easier for me to transition here than to be able to administer whatever attack I'm going to at that point. You don't want your hands down as he's closing in. Those hands are up because it's a whole lot easier to take guard from here. Another thing too about already having your hands up is your ability to reach out and touch a vital as you're pushing off, or you may even push off to grab what's in your pocket, such as pepper spray. You might push off, grab the spray him right in the face. You know, it gives you time, if your hands are here, to get where you need to, whether it's pepper spray, something out of your pocket, pull a blade, whatever it is you have, you're able to buy yourself some time. Again, if you're here and he gets close enough, he can just hit you or back you up into a corner, back you up somewhere, do whatever he wants. But when you're here, you're in a position to be able to act. You can push off, attack if you need to, whatever you got to go for. But if you're going to use those hands, make it count. There are shots that can stop an opponent, and there are shots that don't hurt that much, such as straight punches to the front of the face don't always get the most response. But if you attack this area behind the jaw, even with an open hand, it hurts a lot. Obviously, shots to the throat, if the situation's bad enough, shots to his carotid artery, boom, whether it's coming in from here, coming in this way, whether it's elbows. There are parts of the body that have shock response, and there are those that don't. You know, like for example, the solar plexus, it hurts big time. Catch a shot right there in the solar plexus. It hurts to get hit behind the jaw. A lot of times it'll knock people out. It obviously hurts to get hit anywhere in the throat, or to have your eyes touched straight on to the face this way. You want those shots that count. A lot of times people say open hand strikes in the street are so much better because you don't risk breaking your hand. And I agree with that on a lot of shots, but there may be times where you may need to strike with the fist, and you always want to put the focus right here. That's where it's at. That's the strike zone for the fist. If I do crack somebody with a fist, that's what I'm going for. I'm making that my focus, whether it's going here, boom. That's always my focus, is this part of the fist right here. Now, there's a lot of cues to watch for that will let you know that a possible swing is coming. What a lot of guys will do, you'll see some of them step back. They'll rest back on their dominant leg because they're getting ready to throw that punch. They won't typically throw it from this position unless they come out of nowhere with a hook. But a lot of times, if you see them standing in front of you see them drop back on that dominant leg, they're probably getting postured up for a swing. Another thing to look for is this right here, checking the parameters. A lot of times they're checking the parameters to see if there's anybody significant around before they take the swing. That happens a lot. A lot of times you'll see them looking around, pulling their pants up, you know, posturing up. Be watching all of these things. I want to give you this food for thought as well. Sometimes all it takes is one quick shot to give you enough time to get out of there. Think back on the times in your life when you were wrestling around with friends, or maybe playing around with a sibling, and it got too heated, and then all of a sudden, you know, they scored a lucky shot on you, whether it was a wild smack or a punch right down the middle. Think about how stunned you were in that moment. One time I was playing around with my younger sister. We were wrestling, and she got in a good straight shot right down the middle, punched me in the nose, and it stunned me. And she was afraid because she knew that I was going to be upset. But she got away from me. Man, by the time she hit me and stunned me, she was already gone. It's funny, but it's a perfect example. So to recap, early detection is key. If something don't seem right in your gut, it's probably not right. Listen to your gut and move on if you're able. And make the call if you feel like you need to. Number 2, if someone starts to encroach, you've got to demand distance. Don't ask for it, demand it. Be firm, but not overly confrontational. Number 3, if they decide to break that distance, you've got to be prepared to protect your head and act. And there's a lot that goes into that conversation, but we'll end on that today. We can always dive in a little deeper, and if you have other questions, you can submit those in the comments. I'll be happy to talk about whatever you need to talk about. And we have to understand that there's always so much more that we can cover with these videos. Again, the real world is always going to be unpredictable. There's a million ways that situations can go down. We're laying a foundation here, and that's what these videos are all about. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thanks for watching. Take care.